Michael Unger here for the HR MacMillan Space Centre. Once again, here for our weekly chats with our astronomer Rachel. And as you can see, Rachel and I are not transmitting from our homes. This week, we're actually here in the building. I've got the Mars Curiosity rover. This isn't a Zoom digital background. That's an actual background behind me. And Rachel is in our Ground Station Canada Theatre. And this week's theme is Mars. And of course, Mars has been in the news a lot. There was a few launches this week. Actually, just a launch earlier today. The Chinese launched to Mars. The UAE launched to Mars, and NASA is going to be launching their Perseverance rover to Mars. So lots of people talking about Mars. People are looking up to the skies, and eventually we're going to be talking about humans going to Mars. So that's why we have brought in Canadian astronaut Joshua Kutryk, who's going to join our conversation today, and we're going to be talking about humans going into space, and then as it relates to humans going to Mars, and of course everything else related to humans in space. So welcome, Joshua. How are you?
Hi, thank you for the introduction. I'm doing well, and I'd start off by saying thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I've been to the Space Center a couple times. I've been personally with my family just to visit, and I've been there with the Canadian Space Agency as well. So always a great, fun opportunity to reconnect. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much. Why don't we start off by just, why don't you tell us a little bit about, so you're not in Canada right now, you're down training with lots of other astronauts right now. So why don't you just tell us a bit about what you're, I mean, for one, how are you doing down there in this pandemic time? And tell us a little bit about the work you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm one of the new Canadian astronauts at the Canadian Space Agency. I say new, but I've been working for them for about 3 years since I was selected. And I'm calling you today from where I live in Houston. I work at the Johnson Space Center every day in their human spaceflight programs. And we live here. We moved down here, and we're here for many, many years, training and working. You're right. COVID it's a bit of a serious situation at the moment in Houston. So I am calling you from my home. I go into work fairly regularly, actually, but there's a lot of mitigations and complications due to the whole COVID thing. But that aside, it's still great to be able to talk to you. So what am I doing? I mean, my life is basically a combination of two main things. I say there's training and then there's work. When we were selected in 2017, we go right into training, and we spend about 2.5 years doing an initial astronaut qualification course. That finished for us last January. It turns out there's a lot to learn with being an astronaut. And so we do about 2.5 years of intensive study. And then in sort of the phase that I'm in now, we begin doing technical work, assisting different human spaceflight programs as we continue to train. And that goes on for another period of a couple years. And then by the normal plan, you're assigned to a mission, and then you train specifically for that mission another number of years, and eventually you go to space. But the point to be made is that we do a lot of training, we do a lot of technical work, and the road to space as an astronaut is a very long one. If you add up all the training that we do from the time we're selected to the time that we would fly in space, and if you put it all back to back, we would probably be right now about 5 or 6 years. So you have to like studying, you have to like technical stuff, but of course we all do. I came from a test flying background, and so to spend time working with high risk, high consequence aerospace systems, which is what we do in spaceflight, it's every day is a dream come true. It's just wonderful to go into work at Johnson Space Center and be parts of those teams. And that's a point that I like to emphasize, because in Canada growing up, I was very interested in space. I knew I wanted to do this, but it's sometimes hard to feel like you're close to spaceflight, or to have an appreciation for just how quickly things in spaceflight are advancing. And when you're down here, you get to see that firsthand. Things are going really, really quickly. We really live, I think, in a transformational time in terms of human exploration. If you go back hundreds of years, there was a time when no one on Earth knew if it was possible to cross an ocean and go somewhere on the other side. And then eventually that time came where people started to see that it was possible, and that it was something that might even happen in their lifetime. And that's the point we're at right now. I do really believe that the first human to walk on Mars is alive today. They're probably a student in middle school somewhere, but it's something that's going to happen in our lifetime. We can see the path from here to there. And that's really fascinating for me to think about. What do I do on a day-to-day basis now? Aside from continued training, I work a lot. I've worked this summer quite a bit with some of the commercial crew launches. So supporting as a capsule communicator, the SpaceX launch and the demo crew that's in orbit. That was another big first, the first time a commercial company has achieved low Earth orbit with humans. We're hoping to bring those two astronauts back here in about 2 weeks. I work a lot with EVAs. So last week we were, the crew on orbit is changing out batteries on the International Space Station. In order to do that, there's a team of technical people, engineers. I was the astronaut assigned to that, who we work with this for about a year leading up to it, developing, testing the procedures, going through all the different things that could go wrong, and then in the end, implementing it and being the ones to sort of direct it from the ground. So that's a flavor of some of the technical work that I do. And then all the training in terms of spacewalk training, language training, Russian language, International Space Station training, that all continues on the side as well. So we're busy, but we're immersed in space. And I think that the last thought I'd leave you with before maybe we'll open it up and just see where we end up going with questions. I mentioned it being an exciting time. So I mentioned I'm working with the International Space Station right now, and that's what I'm doing. For Canada, we're very much becoming more and more focused with NASA, our partners here, on the next big step. And the next big step is to the moon. There's two big projects spooling up with that, and Canada is a partner on the Gateway project. You guys have probably heard about that, but that's where we're basically taking this idea of a permanent outpost that we've developed in low Earth orbit, and we're going to go and do that around the moon. So instead of being relatively close to Earth, we're going to go and do it 1,000 times further away. Canada is a partner on that. We're building the robotic system and some AI devices to support it. And because of our involvement in that partnership, Canadian astronauts will end up flying on some of those early moon missions whenever they happen. So for the Canadian Space Agency, we're quite excited about that. And then as a member in this great international partnership, we're really excited about where this whole kind of vector is going, because that's the next step, the moon. If you look at, maybe we did 15, 20 years with the International Space Station, the next step is to do 10-ish, 15 years on the moon, around the moon. And then the step after that, which is coming up actually pretty quickly, is to take that and to go more than 1,000 times from the Earth to the moon, but to go out to millions of kilometers and miles and take everything that we've learned and take it to Mars, which, like I said, is something I think we're going to see happen in this lifetime. So we're very lucky to be a part of that. Everyone is to be alive to see some of this happen, but specifically to be a part of it and a partner country in Canada. And I think that the last thing that I wanted to touch on, just because you mentioned it, is the idea that it's a timely call, because very shortly NASA is going to be launching its next major Mars exploration system from Cape Kennedy, which is close to us down here. We'll be sending out people to observe that launch. And that's something really, really exciting. It's going to Mars with the specific purpose, among others, of looking for signs of life, now and present, microbial. And it's also something pretty neat from my background and interests. It's the first time we're going to try to fly an airplane on another body. So it has a helicopter on board, if you can imagine that. Very, very, very uniquely designed helicopter that is going to try to fly on Mars. So that's A, just pretty cool, but B, it's unbelievable in terms of what this could open up for us, because everything that we've done on Mars so far has been very much through the lens of sort of looking through a soda straw. We've looked at very small sections. I mean, we're using rovers that are very advanced, but it would be as though you went to another planet, you landed in a baseball field, and you just, were at the grass top level kind of looking around. Well, now for the first time, we have a helicopter. It's going to take off. It's going to fly up into the atmosphere, Martian atmosphere. And, it's anyone's verdict what we're going to see. So exciting times for sure with the moon, the Mars plans, and Canada's involvement. And I think This is all stuff I'm very passionate about and could talk on for a while, but maybe we'll just turn it back to you and see if there's questions.
Well, it certainly sounds, I can hear the passion in your voice, and you've come to the right place, because that's Rachel and I, that's what we do every day. And it certainly sounds like you might be getting a bit bored down there. You don't have much to do, a whole lot to do. I'm joking. It sounds like you have a lot to do. Thank you for taking time out of your day. And of course, you really have opened up a lot of different areas that we could go into with questions. So for everyone out there on YouTube land, put your questions into the chat box. We could talk about Joshua's background as a training to be an astronaut. We could talk about Canada's involvement going into space, the Lunar Gateway project that you had mentioned, and of course that next step leading on to Mars. And of course, speaking of studying hard, I know that Rachel is someone that loves studying. She's a big nerd like I am. Where would you like to take the conversation, Rachel?
Well, first of all, Joshua, thank you for joining us. We're very happy to have you here. I had a question for you, and this is a question that I get a lot at the Space Center. So I'm curious as to how you'd answer this. And the question is, how do you respond to those who think going to space and exploring space is a quote unquote useless endeavor when we have more immediate problems here on Earth?
Yeah, it's an important question. There's lots of good answers to it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as with any kind of science work, research and development work that we do, we're doing it to solve problems. And that's certainly been the case with spaceflight so far. Everything that we've done, a lot of it in low Earth orbit around the Earth, has advanced us in aerospace, of course, but it's also helped to solve many, many problems here on Earth. Applications ranging from a lot of our approach to solving climate change is turning out to be based in space. A lot of our approach to different diseases and preventative cares and medicine care, stuff like that has been developed because of our work in space. So it really boils down to the fact that we go to space, we push the borders there in order to solve problems here on Earth, in order to take what we learn, the technologies that we develop, the discoveries that we make, and apply them to Earth problems. And there's many, many examples of us doing that. I named a few, but there's many, many more. And this is, that's no secret. Governments spend money on going to space because it pays for them in the end through the technological spin-offs that they get and that we're able to use here on Earth. So there's a lot of very practical reasons for why we do it. But to kind of take your question a step further and think a little bit more fundamentally, we do it because that's what we have to do. Humans have never sat still anywhere. And had we, our history would be very, very different and probably not as prosperous. We are continuously a species that has to look beyond the horizon, try to go over the next hill, cross the next ocean, whatever you have, because it opens up new opportunity. That's always been the case with human exploration. The medium has changed, so we're not talking about oceans anymore or land exploration, we're talking about space. But the idea is very, very much the same. It's to go where we haven't been in order to open up opportunities. And it's almost cliche to say, but it's a point worth making, that it wasn't that long ago when the general consensus in much of the world was that continent where you were on was the world, and there was nothing outside that. That's really fairly recent history. And just think about how different the world would be had we not tried to explore past that. So we do it for the opportunity that it brings, and we need that opportunity to solve problems that we have right now.
Joshua, we're going to take you back in time, and Rachel and I, we're kind of big kids at heart. So we're going to take the eyes of perhaps an 8-year-old, and shout out to my little cousin Peyton, who just turned 8. But when you were young, Joshua, what were some of the things that excited you? And if you think about where you eventually ended up, like some of the passions that you had and some of the subjects that you got into, and maybe sort of like take us along the pathway that have led you now to becoming an astronaut.
Yeah, gladly. So I remember very, very clearly. I had 2 passions, and I always say this. I had a really deep curiosity about the stuff that I saw. Everything in my life, I wanted to know how it worked and who built it and how they built it. And I had a passion for exploration. And I remember having those two passions, curiosity and exploration, since I was a very young child. Peyton's age, high Peyton or younger. Those were the initial two things in my life, curiosity and exploration. And as I grew up and I developed more interest, those kind of helped funnel my interests. I became very interested in engineering, physics, aerospace, and that took me down the professional road that I took, which in short involved a lot of university study and a lot of flying, operational flying for the military, and then experimental flying for the Air Force and test flying and that. But I do think it really started with the curiosity and the desire to explore. And I have very real memories as a child of looking at the sky in the night. I grew up on a farm in Alberta. We often be out there, no light pollution, just looking up at a clear winter sky. And it's not something that seems to have developed in me. In my memory, it's something that was always there, is just looking into the blackness and saying to myself, well, it looks like there's nothing there, but of course there's something there, and how cool would it be to go explore it? So curiosity, exploration, combined with some more technical interests I picked up along the way. And then, step by step, I started working towards this dream. But it was a dream that I would say was always, has always been alive and with me. And I feel very fortunate for that passion because it's been very motivational.
So if I was to sum up for you, Peyton, out there watching, what Joshua is trying to say is keep looking up and stay curious. Is that right, Joshua?
Yeah,
Let's go to some questions from YouTube, and sticking with the Canadian theme. Pride wants to know, it's not actually, it combines Canada and America. Do you know Bob and Doug? Is what Pride wants to know. Astronaut Bob and Doug that we recently went up to the International Space Station.
Hi, Pride. And yes, I know Bob and Doug. They're both, we all live fairly close to each other down here. So definitely know them, live nearby to them, have worked with them. And I actually had the privilege of doing a fair bit of work with them. So when they launched, I mentioned they were the first commercial vehicle to launch with NASA astronauts. There was a long build up to that. And it was a very technical launch, of course. I was the capsule communicator for the International Space Station during the launch and the first docking of this vehicle. So I spent a lot of time simulating that with the technical teams here in Houston over about the last year, I would say. And then at the end of last May, we finally did it. And so I ended up working with them a fair bit and talking with them real time on the radio as we went about this first docking of a commercial vehicle to the space station, which was a pretty significant historical event. So I know them, I've worked with them, they're great people, and I can't wait to see them come home here in a couple more weeks.
Do they actually know the Canadian connection that have really captured the imagination of all of us across this country?
So I didn't, obviously, I didn't know if I would bring that up or not, but yes, they do. And so here's a little bit of fun trivia. It's tradition at NASA that every night before a launch, and in Russia actually as well, the crews, with the people who are closest to the crew, their trainers and their support and their families, will watch a movie. And it's kind of the last farewell. And of course, this year was very complicated logistically because of COVID. But NASA was adamant this is a tradition and we were still going to do it. And so we did it, and I was part of it. We did it like you and I are doing this right now. Everyone was virtual. Bob and Doug were together in Florida, but most people were virtual. And we watched the movie. And I tell you what the movie was, but it sounds like you already know.
Strange Brew, yes, love it. Let's go. Actually, we're actually just talking a bit about your experiences, but K-Moon wants to know about your recent experience as CAPCOM.
Yeah, it's so CAPCOM is a job that's been around for a while. Astronauts who have done or who are familiar with whatever it is we're working with, because they've done a lot of that training themselves, will be the voice of mission control. And so it's not uncommon for astronauts in sort of my stage of our careers to serve in that position. I've done it for a couple different missions now. We mentioned the one with SpaceX and the first docking of a commercial vehicle, and then I've done a fair bit of work with extravehicular activity as well, talking the astronauts through what they're doing in orbit. The idea of a capsule communicator is to take the output of a tremendously talented but big team here in Houston and funnel it through one voice, one radio to the crew who's about to do it with their hands. So you have to get it right. It can be dangerous if you get it wrong. But it's interesting to me how that all works. It's really magnificent to see it in play. Here in Houston, about a mile from where I'm calling you right now is Mission Control. Giant building, looks like a giant mall or something, littered with antennas on the top, to all these different space assets. And in there's several rooms. So in the one room, and same hallway, same room as Apollo 13 and all you see in all the movies, but we have our main flight control room. And in there's about 20 people, including myself, the flight director, he's the overall boss. And then there's a person for all the technical disciplines. But it's really a big effort because behind all of those people, those are the people we call the front room people. Each of those people have their own rooms behind them in other parts of the building supporting. Because when a simple item that you would think is simple on Earth, like the temperature of a certain circuit comes up, it's always very, very complicated. There's big consequences to getting it wrong. And so even the subtlest things generate this huge engineering effort to make sure 100% that we're doing it right. Eventually it comes up through all the back rooms to the front room, to the flight director, to me, and then to the crew. So yeah, that's kind of a flavor for the job, and it's one that we really enjoy doing.
Interesting. Rachel?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about technology and Canada's involvement, especially in Lunar Gateway with Canadarm. So I'm curious as to if there are any experiments or tech going on right now with the CSA that you're particularly excited about.
So there's a number of things with the CSA I'm excited about. I think the thing I'm most excited about is some of the early developmental work being done for Gateway. So that's the design of this very advanced robotic system that is going to be out there in lunar space, basically building, in some terms autonomously, putting together the next generation space station. I'm involved a little bit with that, but I certainly like to just stay tied into it because I think that it's fascinating subject matter, and it's just a wonderful thing for Canada. In terms of some of the science we do, I think I'm quite excited about our OSIRIS-REx. So we're a big partner in a asteroid return mission, and what that means in sum is that many months ago, NASA launched on a ginormous rocket a machine that is flying out to an asteroid. It's there now. On this device is a Canadian contribution that is mapping the asteroid. It's going to take a sample and bring it all the way back to Earth, and Canada is going to be involved in some of the scientific analysis of that. That's coming up really, really quickly as well in space terms. Quite excited about James Webb, which has unfortunately been delayed again, but Canada also a partner in the James Webb Space Telescope, the biggest. I know you know all about it, and way more than I know about it. But I would say I'm very excited to what this is going to lead to in terms of discovery and in terms of our appreciation for the universe and our spot in it. So James Webb was here actually maybe about a year ago, and I got to see it. It was in Houston, is where I think it's the biggest vacuum chamber in the world. And James Webb was there for many months doing basically space environmental testing. So it's on its way to space eventually, and I'm also very much looking forward to that.
Some interesting questions coming in here. I'm going to stick with sort of the Mars angle here. And Peter wants to know sort of like your thoughts around SpaceX making they hope they land on Mars by 2022, and they have some very ambitious plans to get humans in the next decade. But I think really sort of if you take sort of like the big picture sort of look at, those partnerships, and CSA obviously has a partnership with NASA and with the European Space Agency, and now we're seeing private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin now coming to the mix as well. So maybe comment specifically maybe on the SpaceX plans as well as those partnerships as a whole.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that partnerships between countries, and now we're seeing this new flavor of partnership between governments and companies have always and are proving more and more every day to be essential to space exploration. I think that, I won't comment on the specifics of SpaceX's plans, but SpaceX and their partnership with the US government and the other space partners, other spacefaring nations of the world, is a very, very good thing for all kinds of reasons. It's led to a lot of new innovation and development. It's kind of harnessing, I would say, the power of private industry in a certain way, and of corporate private ingenuity. And that's all very, very good things for us writ large when it comes to spaceflight. Whether or not SpaceX will be able to go to Mars in the 2020s, I don't have the answer to that. But what I would say is that I think I would share this with many people, in that SpaceX has taught us again that the impossible can be made possible, and they've taught us, I think, again as well, never to underestimate the power of kind of human innovation and ingenuity. I remember being I was at test pilot school in 2011, and that's when this idea of, as one example, this idea of returning to Earth a first stage rocket booster, fueling it up and launching it again quickly, like in 24 hours, was sort of first being contemplated. And there was a lot of very informed opinion at the time that was just the wrong approach, was never going to work for all kinds of physical fundamental reasons. And in 2012, they did it. And that was only 8 years ago. And in the last 8 years, it's gotten to a point where it's actually routine now. I've been to Florida. I see where they do this. And it has actually revolutionized, is going to continue to revolutionize how we think about spaceflight and how we do it. Just a month ago, they launched 2 astronauts, humans, on a booster. It came immediately back, and that booster flew again just a matter of days ago. So one small example, but SpaceX shows to us the power of innovation, human ingenuity, and the partnerships that companies like that and Blue Origin are establishing now with governments are a very good thing for that reason.
So speaking of going to Mars, when we go to Mars and start sending people there, what do you envision a human colony on Mars would look like?
I don't know. It's some of the science fiction features, whether be it books, be it the Martian movies, have probably given you ideas that are not that far off, right? However it ends up looking, we know that there's a lot of mass that has to go there, that has to get set up on the surface, and that has to be set up in almost a similar way to the International Space Station, in that it has to be kind of a closed system. So we need to envision a lot of mass. We need to envision, be it domes or structures of some type that are sealed off from the external atmosphere. And we probably have to envision a lot of autonomous transport. So if we look at sort of our propulsion methods now, we're talking about 9 months there, 3 months on the surface, then you catch another opportunity to take a 9-month trip back. I think that in order to get that happening sustainably, there's a lot of autonomous transport in terms of rockets going back and forth between Mars. I think that, initially it could look like Apollo 11. It could look like a very small crew, extremely well trained, touching the surface, staying there for a couple of weeks and coming back. But eventually it's gonna look like dome cities. It's gonna look like closed system living. It's going to have to be sustainable by itself. So there's going to be food growing in greenhouses there. There's going to be in-house medical care. All of that, and all of that, I should add, is stuff that is being worked on right now. I mean, we have people in Canada working on the idea of growing food in a Martian environment in a greenhouse. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I do know that it's possible to do, and I think that's the point to drive home.
You know, Joshua, last night we had a full program all around Mars, and we had some speakers, talking about what humans, what kind of training that you can do to kind of lead up to that point when you're so far away from the Earth. And a lot of it came down to, mental health with being isolated in small places. So if we're talking about these small habitats on Mars, then there's not a lot of place to move around and do stuff, run around. I sort of described in my fear of being claustrophobic, and maybe I would be a good candidate to go to Mars. So what are some of the training? Because obviously just going up to the space station or going to the lunar gateway, you're going to be in tight enclosed spaces for long periods of time, and you're not going to be around people. And maybe COVID time is a bit of that training ground for us. But what are some of the training that you have undergone so far, or maybe are still waiting to do to prepare yourself for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in terms of long duration human spaceflight, which is what we're talking about now with the moon and Mars, and it's what it's the game we're in right now with the space station. We have a routine mission there is 6 or 7 months, but many now are running towards the year mark. So when we're talking about missions like that, of course, there's a huge amount of technical training, but I would almost say that the larger challenge training-wise is some of the issues that you talk about, the behavioral issues, the isolation issues, the confined spaces, and all of that. And that's a very real thing. It's part of our selection. So just a real quick story. One of our selection events involved I don't know where they got it from, but it was about the size of my house. It was on wheels. It was very, very dark inside. And basically you came to the front door of this contraption, big contraption on wheels. And the fellow by the door says, "You have half an hour. We want you to go in, find the radio." There was a radio hidden somewhere in there, and then make your way back out. So he opens the door, you go in, he slams the door, you hear this metal close, and it's pitch black. Like you cannot see your hand in front of your face. And then you start feeling around and there's walls everywhere. Your initial indication is that you're in a metal bubble. But eventually, as you start exploring, you find a little hole, and then you find one you can fit through. And that's kind of how this whole contraption is laid out. And eventually, if you were successful, you find this radio, and then you try to find your way back, which is the really difficult part. So we were selected, kind of for this. In terms of the training, NASA has an entire program devoted to this. We call it behavioral health training and studies. And it's a very real part of some of the training that we do here. So we go on expeditions as one example. I've been on a couple. I was on a caving expedition in Slovenia. There's a lot of technical objectives to that training, science that we're doing. But some of the major objectives have to do with learning to work and live with a small crew in a high-risk environment for long periods of time, because it is widely accepted and acknowledged that's one of the biggest challenges we face with long-duration spaceflight. We're gonna figure out the technical aspects. We've figured out many of them already, but we have never put 4 or 6 or however many humans in a spaceship and sent them away for 2 years. We've never done that. No one knows what the human body will do when we do that. And so it's something that is taken quite seriously here, definitely.
I think one of the most important aspects to mental health in space is a question that Pride asks again, which is important to my heart, is can you drink coffee in space?
Yeah, you definitely can. So there's space coffee. In training here, I've had it. Some people, I thought it tasted very much like normal coffee. Yeah, you can drink anything in space. I want to make sure I so have it. You just need to deal with it properly because, of course, liquid is just going to come together in a ball and float away. So space coffee comes in a little bag with a one-way straw that you insert very, very carefully and then basically just suck it up. So there's not quite the pleasure of drinking a hot cup of coffee, but you can have coffee, definitely.
So you're not bringing the beans up, you're not grinding them. Another perhaps a relevant question comes from Harry, and he's talking about viruses. Now, of course, this is something that we're talking a lot about right now, but of course, when we're talking about going to the moon, going to Lunar Gateway, or even going to Mars and coming back, is the possibility of bringing back or even bringing there, potential viruses. And of course, there's a lot of preparation that goes into when we make these spacecraft. Could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the preparation that you do as astronauts, and also perhaps on the engineering side when they're building these spacecrafts to prevent the transmission of viruses?
Yeah, both directions, if you will, are very important considerations. So the idea of contaminating wherever you're going to, and the idea of contaminating yourself, your spacecraft, and Earth from wherever you're coming back from. Very important considerations that get a lot of attention here. Spacecraft design is a exceedingly expensive thing, spacecraft manufacturing, and part of the reason for that has to do with this and keeping everything completely clean down to the tightest detail. In terms of the human aspect, quarantine is a part of an astronaut's life. So crews spend a significant amount of time in quarantine before their launch, and the purpose of that is to of course completely isolate them and make sure that they aren't taking anything into the spacecraft that we're going to regret, or to other worlds. In the Apollo missions, of course, there was also quarantine upon the crew's return to Earth for this reason. And I suspect that we're going to have, without a doubt, the exact kind of thing going on when we next have humans walking on the moon. Something coming up again fairly quickly. 2024 is when it's supposed to happen. And I fully expect that when that crew comes back, they'll be in quarantine for quite a while, undergoing microscopic evaluation to make sure that there's nothing on them. Yeah, it's a very real thing. The building here, just as a follow-on to this, where all the Apollo samples that were brought back from the moon, they're all in one place, and it's here in Houston. Again, it's about a mile from where I'm sitting right now. I've been in there, but to this question, Harry, it's like you're walking into a spaceship. You go through so many levels of security and doors, biosecurity, I mean, just to get into where these sacred samples are stowed. So it's a very important consideration.
Awesome. We're going to end off with a final question, which comes from back to Peter again, who's a nuclear engineer, actually. And he's interested in, of course, some of the advanced propulsion systems that are going to get us to Mars. Because at this point, it takes about 8 months, Rachel, to get to Mars. So it would be perhaps a lot easier for someone like me, being in a tight capsule, if we could get there quicker. What are some of the ideas that you've heard about? Because there isn't, I don't think there's one idea. There's a few out there that have been intriguing to you, that have caught your eye.
Yeah. So just speaking to my personal interest, intriguing to me is the idea of nuclear propulsion. There's other work being done with ion engines, for example. Some of that work is being done right here in Houston. There's a company based really close to where I am at Astra. They're connected to the Canadian Space Agency. The Canadian Space Agency has helped them develop some of that technology. So electric engines, nuclear engines, I think these are all very intriguing to me personally. But in terms of the wider program, I do want to emphasize that. I mean, people look at Mars right now and they say it feels like something that is going to be impossible. It's not. We could do it now with the propulsion technology that we have, but what you have to consider is the fact that we're waiting for that. We're waiting for the next giant leap forward in propulsion technology, the revolution in space propulsion, and that is something that also I think is very likely to happen soon. Just even with the two examples that I talked about already. If you look at trips like the trip to Mars, it's full of complexity and risk. And so we're looking at all kinds of different highly technical solutions to these very challenging problems. Some of them very challenging problems like radiation and how do you protect crews from that and the unknown of it. But at the end of the day, the majority, a lot of these problems are reduced just so much if you can just solve the propulsion problem. So we talk about these problems, radiation, healthcare, the mental health problems you were talking about, sustainability, how do you get that much food to Mars? We talk about a lot of these problems in the context of our current propulsion technology. But nothing in our history has ever stayed the same. And our ability to propel vehicles in space is not going to stay the same. We are going to have success with some of these new methods, and that's going to change everything. If we can solve the propulsion problem, and we solve the speed problem, we go faster, all these other problems that we're worried about become a lot less worrying. And that, for me, is why I'm so optimistic about the future and our ability to get to Mars. So Peter,
awesome.
Whatever you're working on, work harder.
And certainly come back, Peter, because we'd love to have more of those conversations. But for today, we're gonna sign off. Joshua, thank you so much for taking time out of your astronaut training to join us today. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you perhaps in person sometime soon. You can come back with your family when we can do that. For everyone out there on YouTube land, we will see you again this time next Thursday, 2 o'clock. Next week's theme is, what is light? Do we know what light is? Rachel, do we know what light is? We think we know what light is, but we're actually going to get into this next week, 2 o'clock on YouTube. Hope to see you all there. See you next time.
See you. Thank you.